Hello and good evening. Good morning to some of you and good afternoon to some of you as well. Welcome to our first China panel organized by the brave students of the Zeta Beta Tau at Columbia University. We are very, very honored to be hosted by such amazing group of students who have really stepped up to give a platform to members of communities that are experiencing different types of oppression and different types of treatment by the Chinese Communist Party abroad. My name is Se-Hoon Kim. I am currently serving as the director of the Captive Nations Coalition of the Committee on Present Danger China, and I will be moderating this event. First and foremost, I would like to quickly go over the safety procedures. Everyone will be muted unless called on. Only hosts have permission to unmute. Please be respectful. We will not tolerate disruption, but will tolerate discussion and disagreement. Any deliberate attempt to disrupt the meeting without contributing will result in removal. And at this point, we will be having speaker presentations. Again, we would like to ask every participant to please listen respectfully, and you will be able to post your questions on the chat. And please keep that as short and concise as possible. So without further ado, I would like to invite Miss Rushan Abbas from the Campaign of Uyghurs. A bit of introduction about her. She has been a very, very active, not only an activist, but also a huge advocate for the Uyghur people throughout the years. So we're very honored to have her. And without further ado, Ms. Rushan Abbas.
Thank you so much, and thank you for organizing this event and for bringing together so many the brave faces representing the resistance to the tyranny and the oppression of the CCP. The Chinese regime is waging war on the free thought, and for the Uyghurs, this has meant the path that has been paved for active genocide. The most highly publicized part of the genocidal crimes towards the Uyghurs has been the construction of a vast apparatus of concentration camps, and this is the largest mass internment of individuals based on their ethnic identity seen as the Holocaust. These camps have been falsely labeled as vocational training centers by the Chinese authorities. Detainees who have managed to release only because they carried other countries' citizenship or passports. According to them, according to those former inmates, the most horrific things are happening. Journalists are reporting the grim reality of those camps. They have testified to the mass attempted at brainwashing in Enkhbat. They are being required to worship the Chinese state and reject their cultural identities. They speak to being chained to the floor, forced to use bathrooms in buckets, being given sterilization drugs, hearing screams from torture victims, and rampant sexual abuse. These are such grave atrocities, and they conjure up in our minds images that we thought, were banished for a previous century. But the atrocities do not end here. And outside of those camps, the life is also like is an open air prison, as a surveillance apparatus monitors the movement of all Uyghurs within its grasp. It tracks the retina, gait, and the fingerprint data to create a data-driven genocide of the 21st century. This sort of surveillance, combined with widespread over-policing and the limiting movement, has allowed the CCP to criminalize the very act of being Uyghur. Basically, the right given to Uyghurs is if you want to continue to live as Uyghurs, you will die. They sent men and women to the camps for the most banal actions using their data collection to criminalize common behaviors. And the other men are sent to serve as free labor in Chinese factories. Yes, basically the Chinese communist regime brought back modern day slavery by enslaving millions of Uyghurs. And this has created within this genocide an engine of economic power that not only seeks to destroy the Uyghur people, but also to profit off their demise. Companies around the world, especially those in textile industry, have been implicated in the use of Uyghur forced labor. This is not just the complicity in the face of modern day slavery, but it's also complicity in the face of genocide. How is this acceptable? The answer is not, it's not acceptable. Yet each day, dozens of companies continue their shipments to keep their financial bottom line strong. And the Uyghur women and the children have been especially victimized by this genocide as well. The impact of forced sterilization and systematic sexual abuse, forced abortions, has turned the bodies of Uyghur women into central battleground. Basically, the Uyghur women's bodies becoming a battleground of the war against the Uyghurs. Through the double relative program, and the men are sent to concentration camps or to prisons. The state media, Chinese state media, reported that 1.1 million Han Chinese men, they sent to Uyghur homes, live inside of Uyghur homes, and they supervise and monitor their lives. I call this government-sponsored mass rape of the Uyghur women. As China seeks to erase the Uyghurs, relatives abroad have lost contact with those back home in East Turkestan. This has been devastating to children whose parents have vanished. Years, especially those critical to development, are being lost each day. Inside the schools of East Turkestan, children are being banned from speaking their native language and taught to reject their cultural heritage and their religion. This is done to accomplish the long-term goal of the CCP to eradicate the entire generation of Uyghurs and breaking the roots connecting us to the past. And this genocide has not been without cost for me as well. As a retaliation for my activism, just 6 days after I spoke on the panel about CCP's crimes back in the September 2018, my own sister, Dr. Gulshan Abbas, is my sister. You can see that's my sister, a retired medical doctor. She was abducted from her home, and for more than 3 years now, we have absolutely no information on her whereabouts. For over 2 years, I begged for answers on the social media and the writing op-eds, speaking on the panels and being so vocal, and the demand answers on my sister's whereabouts was greeted with only insult and ridicule from the CCP level attacks on me and trying to dehumanize me. When we received reports that she has been sentenced to prison, as I mentioned, a retired medical doctor, guilty of nothing but only helping the sick people and being my sister, law-abiding citizen in China. But we have heard from third-party information that she was sentenced harshly. End of last year, we got this news. And now, still, I don't know where she's being held to this date. I have not seen proof of life of her. The brutality knows no bounds, and I am not the only one. All Uyghurs in diaspora are facing the same reality. My husband's entire family are missing since April 2017. And many, many Uyghurs in diaspora, they have not seen or heard from their loved ones. Mothers have not heard from their children, and children do not know the whereabouts of their parents. And they have lost years that will never be reclaimed. This year in London, early June and mid-September, the Uyghur Tribunal heard evidence from nearly almost 100 witnesses. It reviewed tens of thousands of pages of evidence to come to a non-biased judgment of what was happening in East Turkestan. We heard from former inmates, former victims, scholars, experts, and as well as a perpetrator himself, a former policeman. And now we are waiting for the Uyghur Tribunal's verdict. But I was fortunate enough to be able to share my experience there as well as a fact witness, and the heard from other witnesses. It's just that some of these has been extremely difficult for me to sit and hear, especially the former policeman who served as a guard there. I was appalled, horrified, and keep thinking about my sister. And also, here in front of me was the culmination of the efforts of thousands of people around the world to call attention to the defining issue of this century. And it was being broadcasted around the world. So I was inspired all at once, actually. And also, the Uyghur women who testified there were being attacked by the CCP, and the CCP tried to shame them on public platforms, a common tactic used against the female activists or anyone who speak against the CCP. Spread libel, attack, and try to discredit them. The CCP uses shame, fear, and intimidation to make sure the world looks away long enough for their cleansing of the Uyghur people to be complete. Yet we know that even if we were to stop, the CCP would not. This genocide began before our advocacy did, and if our advocacy ends tomorrow, the genocide would continue still. So we have to keep fighting. We have to keep doing what we are doing. I have spoken at rallies, panels, colleges, and the hosted by US embassies around the world, and attended workshops. But I have repeatedly, while I was raising the atrocities facing my people, and I will continue to do this, but in United States, the influence of CCP is so strong as ever. And I want to mention something here today. While I appreciate Columbia University hosting this panel today, I want to share my experience. Last time when I was invited to speak at this university at the early 2020, the event was canceled due to the pressure. And at that moment, I felt like I was in China rather than in the United States. This is something people in China are supposed to face, not we, the people living in this democracy and the freedom of our academic discourse. Here, how that's being threatened by this far-reaching power, it was really disappointing. So events like this, like this one, is because it's seen as a threat, and every person who can learn about who we are and what's happening to us is one more voice to add to our towards demanding justice. So it's extremely important. Nations around the world have begun to designate what's happening as genocide, and the legislation has begun process of passage to ban goods tainted with this labor. And they are excellent start, but we must continue to pressure the international community until genocide ends. And I ask each of you to spread the word, tell your friends and families about what's happening in East Turkestan and in Hong Kong, in Southern Mongolia, in Tibet, and show them the map. Tell them about why these people in China facing such atrocities. It's a grave threat, nothing less than the systematic elimination of our people and the culture for the Uyghurs right now, this genocide. Right now, it's moving with the great speed. The Uyghur birth rate has fallen by more than half, according to the data collected. So it's not too late to put an end to this. It's not too late for the international community to demand investigation, to reject economic pressure and the profit motivations, and to sanction those responsible. And this fight does not occur in a vacuum. It's a fight for the survival of the Uyghurs, but also it's fight for the survival of the next group that faces this threat. If we fail to stop this genocide today, we will leave our world vulnerable to the next and the next. Instead, we can choose today to say that democracy, civil liberties, and the basic human rights are values worth taking a stand for. I'm going to end this by just saying, instead of further erosion of these principles, the Uyghur genocide must be the turning point before the future of democratic freedom and the values of humanity are compromised. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Abbas. And just as a point of reference, Ms. Abbas with her colleagues currently are now traveling. Unfortunately, will not be able to join us for our second half hour of our panel discussion. So before we get into the specifics by the other panelists, I'd like to ask you, Ms. Abbas, with one of the pre-selected questions about East Turkestan, so that you can answer, and you'll be able to continue on with your work. So the question is, what is China's endgame in East Turkestan? What strategies have they used to bring the population under control? If you can describe more about the use of modern surveillance technology and why the international community is so slow to recognize and act on what is happening. What would an effective response look like?
Well, the end game is eliminating the Uyghur people, as there is this active genocide going on. And the main strategy they are using to accomplish this is a physical sense, is a democratic control, and they are attempting to make our homeland unlivable, and especially for the raising children. There is basically no more Uyghur children are being born. Forced sterilization through medication is commonplace, and as well as forced insertion of IUD devices inside of the Uyghur women, and as well as forced marriage that sponsored by the government, while government is offering housing, jobs, and the money for the Han Chinese men to come and marry Uyghur women. And Uyghur women cannot refuse such a forced marriage, because if she says no, then she's being labeled as radicalized Muslim who didn't want to marry non-Muslim Han Chinese. So when Uyghur women are marrying Han Chinese men and the Uyghur children are now no longer being able to be born, so what's going to happen? Basically, this is basically a system of government eliminating the Uyghur people. By eliminating the Uyghur people, the CCP is able to exert full control over East Turkestan for its economic purposes. As you all know, Xi Jinping's signature project for the world domination, the Belt and Road Initiative, puts our homeland, East Turkestan, in the epicenter of this project. East Turkestan is a gateway to Central Asia, a gateway to Europe and the Africa and the Middle East, and as well as the 4 important legs from the Belt and Road Initiative goes through our homeland. And that's why they decide to eradicate Uyghurs, basically exterminate them. And even some high government officials have used the term final solution, saying that, taking the Uyghur problem to the final solution stage. That's why basically, they are trying to make the Uyghurs religion and the culture, they outlawed all of the normal practice of religion, and even any kind of cultural icons like mosques or cemeteries are being demolished. We just started this boycott campaign, boycott Hilton campaign, about a week ago, because Hilton is building a building a hotel in a place that once a mosque stood in Hotan that was being demolished. So it's frustrating, more than just those Western companies like Hilton and the others complying with China and doing such horrific business deals, but it's also actually complicit. Not only complicit with, yes, it is complicit with Uyghur genocide. At the same time, they are complicit with China's war on freedom and democracy, China's war on humanity.
Thank you so much, Ms. Abbas, for that insightful answer. And we hope that your work can make the impact that you are looking to have. And again, thank you to all of our panelists for being here again. Such amazing discussions are needed on a daily basis, and in a platform like this provided by our students at the Columbia University, specifically by the Zeta Tau Beta brothers, who have really stepped up to give us this great platform. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Enkhbat Toochog from Southern Mongolia, also known as Inner Mongolia. His work has been mainly focused on the rights of Southern Mongolians for close to 30 years now, and it is our honor to have him on board with us today. So without further ado, Mr. Enkhbat Toochog.
Hi, so much channel. Good evening and good afternoon to some of you. As Sehun introduced, my name is Enkhbat Toochog. I'm a Mongolian from Southern Mongolia. Since this panel is about China's human rights issues, I'll focus on the human rights conditions of Southern Mongolia, but before discussing various human rights abuses in Southern Mongolia, I'd like to touch upon the brief history of Southern Mongolia, because when you mention Mongolia, many people think of the independent country of Mongolia, but I'm from Southern Mongolia, which is the first occupied nation of China. So Southern Mongolia is widely known as Inner Mongolia as a result of the direct translation of Chinese word called Neimungu, which is a highly Sinocentric terminology that has a strong implication of China's territorial claim over this part of Mongolia. In the Mongolian, we call ourselves as Over Mongol, which is a simple geographical terminology, meaning the southern part of Mongolia, or simply just Southern Mongolia. But the Chinese translation, Neimungu, has deliberately distorted this simple geographical terminology and turn it into a political propaganda, claiming that this part of Mongolia is China's inner or inside of China, Inner Mongolia. So territorially, Southern Mongolia has a vast territory of nearly 2 million square kilometers, covering the so-called the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region and Mongolian inhabited areas in neighboring Chinese provinces and historical Mongolian territories elsewhere within the borders of People's Republic of China. Demographically, the Southern Mongolian population in Southern Mongolia is about 6 million, which is twice as large as that of the independent country of Mongolia, or we normally call Northern Mongolia. So Southern Mongolia had always been an integral part of the greater Mongolia and maintained its own government, diplomacy, military, and currency up until 1949. So in 1949, Southern Mongolia was officially annexed to China and became the first so-called nationality minority autonomous region. This is when the darkest chapter of Southern Mongolian history starts. Calling Southern Mongolia as model autonomy, which is in fact nothing but a de facto testing ground of China's all forms of ethnic policies. The government of China has experimented a series of genocide, ethnic cleansing, political purge, economic exploitation, and cultural assimilation and environmental destruction in Southern Mongolia before they put them into practice in other areas such as Tibet and East Turkestan. For example, from the late 1960s through early 1970s, the government of China carried out a massive genocide campaign in Southern Mongolia. At least 100,000 Mongolians were tortured to death and 500,000 persecuted. At that time, the Mongolian population was 1.5 million in Southern Mongolia. That means 1/3 of the total population was affected by this massive genocide campaign. So in the 1980s, the Chinese government has escalated this cultural assimilation and population transfer in Southern Mongolia, and millions of Chinese peasants poured into Southern Mongolia and pushed the indigenous Mongolian out of their ancestral land. Starting early 2000, the Chinese government has implemented a series of new policies under which Mongolian traditional nomadic way of life was blamed for the environmental degradation, which in fact was caused by the Chinese farming and agricultural practice. So hostile and discriminatory in nature, these policies include the so-called ecological migration and the livestock grazing ban. Enforcing these policies, the local government forcefully displaced the entire Mongolian herders from their ancestral grazing lands to predominantly Chinese populated urban and agricultural areas. So in the past 2 decades, grazing livestock on the grassland has been considered as a crime. And the Mongolian herders who graze their livestock on their own land have been subject to heavy fines and livestock confiscation, arrest, detention, and even imprisonment. In fact, the government of China has never been shy about publicly advocating the eradication of Mongolian traditional way of life. For example, in 2015, the Chinese central government state council website publicly announced that by end of 2015, China would resettle all remaining 1.2 million nomads within its borders. This means China has officially wiped out the millennia-old nomadic civilization 7 years ago within its borders. This not only impacted the Mongolian herders, but also impacted like Tibetans and I think some Kazakhs also. So after these 7 decades of physical genocide, deprivation of all kinds of rights, erasure of distinct way of life, and total destruction of a natural environment, now the Chinese government is targeting our last defense of national identity, which is our language. A wholesale cultural genocide has been launched by the Chinese authorities in Southern Mongolia after crashing last year's large-scale nonviolent resistance movement. The official euphemism of this new round of cultural genocide is bilingual education, or more precisely, second generation bilingual education policy, which is in fact is a carefully planned campaign to wipe out Mongolian language, culture, identity, and once and for all, and turn Southern Mongolia into a homogeneous Chinese society that is free from any future ethnic problem. So sensing this genocidal nature of the campaign, last September, the entire Southern Mongolian population has risen up and carried out a region-wide civil disobedience resistance movement. Tens of thousands of students took to the street, and millions of Mongolian parents and teachers, even ordinary herders, and even some government officials took part in this resistance movement. And we estimate 300,000 students joined the school boycott. According to some reports, this protest is the largest mass movement in the mainland China since the 1989 student movement. So, of course, the Chinese government responded with a mass arrest and arbitrary detention. We estimate around 10,000 Southern Mongolians have been arrested, detained, or placed under house arrest. Many of them are still under extrajudicial detention without any legal due process. So in addition to this, the government of China also used many other methods of intimidation, including like firing people from jobs, removing officials from positions, expelling and blacklisting students, suspending herders, social benefit, denying access to bank loans, and even confiscating their property. So following this brutal crackdown, what the government of China is carrying out now in Southern Mongolia is a region-wide intensive training called the Training for the Firm Inculcation of Chinese Nationality Common Identity, under the slogan of speak Chinese and become a civilized person. The entire Mongolian population, including students, teachers, government officials, and even ordinary herders, are subjected to this training to discard their so-called narrow national Mongolian identity and become a more civilized member of Chinese nationality. That's what they're doing now. And all of these are part of China's, the latest updated version of ethnic policy called second generation ethnic policy, proposed by three official scholars, namely Ma Rong, Hu Anggang, and Hu Lianhe. And this is, and then implemented by Xi Jinping. And this is obviously, it's revising the China's so-called, ethnic policy that was modeled after Stalin's nationality definition. And now they are claiming to mimic the United States melting pot model. So, so why China is so desperately trying to wipe out the Mongolian population and turn Southern Mongolia into a worry-free zone? What's China's main interest in Southern Mongolia? First, it is China's national security interest in Southern Mongolia. Southern Mongolia has always been called the Chinese motherland's northern frontiers by the Chinese due to its strategic location between China and Russia, and the most importantly, independent country of Mongolia. For example, during the Soviet era, Southern Mongolia was considered China's front line with the revisionist country of Soviet Union and Mongolian People's Republic. Today, China is still worried about Southern Mongolia's possible merger with the independent country of Mongolia, which is not only considered by the Southern Mongolian as their mother country, but also it's most importantly, it's a democratic country. So The secondly is, Southern Mongolia is China's energy base, or China in 2009, China announced that Southern Mongolia is China's largest energy base. So thirdly, Southern Mongolia has always been the favorite destination of Chinese colonial settlers. As you know, Southern Mongolian population ratio and is now 1 Mongolians and 5 Chinese, which was actually before the establishment of the People's Republic of China. The population ratio was 5 Mongolian, 1 Chinese now. So this ratio is reversed. So these are the main reasons why China is trying to erase Mongolian culture and wipe out the Mongolian identity, and then turn Southern Mongolia into a simple and plain Chinese province. I think it's time is up. I have to wrap up. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Enkhbat, Toochog. And again, we wish nothing but goodwill towards the people of Southern Mongolia at this time. Thank you so much. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Tenzin Sampho from the US-Tibet Committee. Mr. Tenzin Sampho has been an active member within the Tibetan community for a number of decades now. And we're very honored to have him. He was originally from Tibet. And right now, as a Tibetan American, he is also serving the Tibetan American community in the United States. So without further ado, Mr. Tenzin Sampho.
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to speak with our audience, and Columbia University hosting this very important event. I hope that there will be many of these opportunities for us to raise and give awareness of the atrocities that are happening throughout China, not only Tibetans, but the Uyghurs and the Inner Mongolians, and now the Hong Kong and the Chinese people themselves. We have been suffered continuously ever since the Chinese Communist Party has established in 1949. So this is all very, familiar stories that I hear and I am aware of, like the Uyghurs, the Inner Mongolians, and the Tibetans. And so this is a common theme that Chinese government is to destroy the identity of the different ethnic, like Tibetans, the Uyghurs, Inner Mongolia, and now Hong Kong, and even to the larger extent the Chinese, they are also suffering. So let me give you an overview of the Tibetan issue before we talk about the Tibetan, human rights that we are supposed to focus on this time. So let me give you, a little bit of background, and then I will, talk about the human rights issue. Tibet has been independent country for thousands of years, and there were times that the Tibetan have invaded part of China, and then the British invaded, and so did the Mongols, and then the Qing dynasty, and then early 1912, all the Chinese after the Qing dynasty was fell for the republic. All the Chinese, the militaries, all the people from China were kicked out until China invaded Tibet in 1949. First, Tibetan territory is so-called Amdo region, which is the eastern part of Tibet, and then the Kham region, and then later Tibetans were forced to negotiate with the so-called 17-point agreement, which was forced to sign in 1951, May 23rd in Beijing. The Tibetans didn't want to, but their life was threatened. And they were, forced. You have to accept whether peacefully or forcefully. So from 1951, 1959, there was a lot of Chinese army mainly came to two sides of the eastern side and the northern side of Tibet, and then conquered and occupied Tibet since 1959. And then the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and more than 80,000 Tibetans had to escape for their safety. And during those 3-4 days in Lhasa alone, the report says that 80,000 Tibetans were slaughtered in 3-4 days of the wars that took place in Lhasa. So the Tibetans, we live in a very seclusive life. A lot of people try to protect the Tibetan religion and culture, and we didn't allow a lot of the international communities, different countries to introduce and modernize our country. But anyway, the result was the Chinese thought this is an easy a place to take over. So Chinese invaded Tibet in 1959 totally. So the Tibetans, we have different language, we are different culture, physically we are different, we have our own land, culture, religion, everything is different and distinct from the Chinese mainland. So there's nothing that you can identify that Tibet is part of China, and the Tibetans, 99% people of the Tibetans to this day are yearning and want to be independent, not be part of China. So we must be aware of the Chinese, how they have been ruled Tibet and how they try to Sinicize the Tibetans. 1959, they invaded it, and then soon after they have the control till 1966, just before the Cultural Revolution. There were a lot of destructions on the Tibetan culture, Tibetan language, land, culture, everything that you name it had been destroyed by the Chinese, Communist Party, and sent thousands of Chinese army and Chinese workers, cadres, to brainwash and have a total grip on Tibet. And then many of you know and experienced that China started a cultural revolution. Again, the culture, the language, the tradition, the way of living, religion, everything is destroyed. From 1966 and in 1976, during the Cultural Revolution. So the Tibetans took another blow to their culture, their language, their identity. So during those Cultural Revolution, a lot of people have to commit suicide, a lot of people imprisoned, a lot of people were tortured, and there is a daily brainwash by the Chinese government that the Tibetan old society is evil, backward, so on and so forth, and the Chinese government came to liberate, so-called liberate Tibet. But in reality, this is the worst invasion, the worst in anywhere in the world that Chinese Tibetans have suffered. They just want to wipe out the Tibetan culture, religion, tradition. The rich become poor, the poor become poorer, and there are a lot of people having, how to eat on a daily basis, and everything is rationed. And there was the Chinese people control almost every, companies, any government workers, everything is, controlled and operated by China. So-called Tibetan Autonomous Region is only on paper, and they keep saying, Tibetans have, freedom, but in reality, every single policy, every single the leaders of Tibet, Amdo, in Kham area were chosen and appointed by the Chinese government, and they have to obey every single rule under the direct rules and regulations came from China, not by the Tibetans. If it's an autonomous region, the Tibetans should have the right to rule and elect their own leaders and preserve their culture, language, tradition, religion, whatever you might be. So Chinese government is nothing but a destructive for the Tibetan identity, and they have been doing this in the last 4 years since 1959. So this is a typical way of the Chinese try to brainwash and not let the Tibetans to practice their religion, language, culture, so on. I mean, there are so many things that both our two previous panelists discussed. This is a very similar culture genocide that the Chinese have been pursued. For example, in 1980s, early 80s, there was a lot of restrictions on the women's. They cannot have more than 2 kids, and there were a lot of forced sterilization and forced abortion. And then there was 1980s again, and the 1990s lasted. There was destruction of a Tibetan vast jungles in the east in Kongo area. You not only just destructed the forest land, but they never reforest or put new plants. So a lot of trees and minings and water was diverted. I mean, as you know, there are so many. And then plus there were a lot of the Tibetans who nomad and peasant and the farmers. They were forced location, that they didn't want to move to the lower part or in Chinese provinces like Sichuan and Gansu and Xinjiang, whatever they might be fit. And when they don't do it, they will physically tortured and forced to live. And when they were living in the different part of this group, again, not the problem is they were given some small homes, but there was no way of making a livelihood, because a lot of them nomads and a lot of farmers, they do not have other skills to survive. And the Chinese government gave a very small,
Tenzin, sorry, we do have to move along, but we will be able to share a lot more as we go into our second section with the questions. So if it's okay, we will be moving ahead with the introduction of the other panelists.
All right.
So right now I would like to introduce Mr. Baggio Leung, who was an elected member of the Hong Kong's Legislative Council. He is now exiled here in the United States and is working to advocate for the Hong Kong community in Hong Kong and abroad as well. And without further ado, Mr. Baggio Leung.
Thanks, Zihun. Thanks, organizer, for having me to say a few words. Let me open PowerPoint. In the following section, I will briefly introduce what happened to Hong Kong. And before telling Hong Kong story, I will briefly introduce myself. So I'm Baggio. I was born and raised in Hong Kong and founded a political party Aspiration after the Umbrella Revolution. So I was one of the first folks who was forcefully disqualified from the legislative body that I had been elected to and was put into custody afterward. And afterward, I'm on the wanted list again, subversion, because I'm doing advocacy work here in Washington, DC. I think more people know about the situation of Hong Kong during the 2019 protests. So what makes the protest so special? Why it can be so long-lasting and with such a strong momentum? Different from all past experience that we have, this time around, protesters are deliberately leaderless. We are organizers, we are well-disciplined, but no one is in charge. You cannot find anyone managing the whole things. It is just like a machine or self-learning AI that can run by ourselves. People are receiving information through social platforms, Telegram channels, online forums, and they decide by themselves what to do. If momentum gathered behind one idea, then people act. We express the ideals of freedom instead of idolizing a particular person. Also, the movement is not just happening in Hong Kong. We had rally in over 50 cities in the same days, also doing advocacy work around the world in United Kingdom, in Canada, in Australia, in EU, of course, also in United States. And our compatriots who fight on the street, who fight in the university, who sacrifice their flesh and blood, they hope to tell the world one single message: please don't ever trust China. So what happened to Hong Kong and Hong Kongers? Why we want to tell the world that never trust China? 24 years ago, the handover of sovereignty in 1997, July 1st, was the beginning of China's suppression of Hong Kong, regardless of Hong Kong people. In 2020, the July 1st, a dangerous and ridiculous so-called national security law was introduced to Hong Kong. And once again, no Hong Kong people were asked. And after these 2 critical days, Hong Kong has deteriorated from being known as the Pearl of the Orient to a city of pain and fear. The city was swallowed by police brutality, mass arrests, selective law enforcement, abuse of procedure, and appalling sentence. They implement that the so-called national security law without asking Hong Kong people and arrest whoever they want to. They cancel the election. They even arrest activists and politicians just because they participate in the primary election. And until today, more than 10,000 Hong Kongers were arrested because of the movement, and more than 140 were arrested under the national security law. And less than half of them were granted bail, means that they were detained into custody before hearing and sentencing. And truth behind the scenes, behind those figures, was even more frustrating. Every day when we wake up, the first message on our phone was usually who of our friends being arrested, another friend being sentenced to jail, or another court case has been appealed by the regime because the regime want the heaviest punishment. The Chinese Communist Party just want to wipe out the entire generation of Hong Kong people. And this is not just figures, this is all life. And I must reiterate that China's expansionist and coercive behavior are not only a problem of Hong Kong, not just for Asia, but also a threat to international order and democracy around the world. From the denial of responsibility for spreading the CCP virus, to Uyghur genocide, to trying to pressure or influence United States companies like NBA and Disney. This all shows that this is not just an issue of Hong Kong versus China. This is an issue about liberty versus dictatorship. This is war between justice and the evil regime. And Hong Kong's financial center status actually providing support in terms of like loan and fund to supporting CCP to mess things up. There's no better way to send a strong message against the tyranny for its repression of Hong Kong and other coercive behavior by hitting where it hurts. Finance, the banking system of Hong Kong, the ATM of China. Think about to limit Hong Kong's financial center ability. The knock-on effect on capital flow will absolutely create a better opportunity to force China back to the negotiation table or to the right track. And later on, during I will be back to Washington D.C. and then see how I can like do the advocacy work, and how can we fight in this difficult situation. I think the first point is during the like Thanksgiving, during Christmas, whatever festival, when we buy a gift or we do any consumption, see who produces it. Say no to forced neighbor products. Say no to China's product unless they change to be good. I will try my best to do my job here in DC, and I need your help to email your representative, show them your concern, tell them that you want the tyranny to pay the cost. Our individual actions may do little to deter China, but I believe that together we can make a huge difference. And I want to rephrase a quote from my good friend Sam Zhou to conclude my opening. Sam is the father of a baby yet to be born and is now in jail and facing a maximum lifelong prison sentence simply because he participated in a primary election in Hong Kong. He said, "Let Hong Kong's belief become your faith." I'm not asking you that to commit yourself to a Hong Kong issue. At the end of the day, we may differ in the values and issue that we commit ourselves to. But the fundamental belief that exists in all of our hearts is that all people have the freedom to practice any and all faith without fear. All people, including those who are under repression, deserve justice. And for this single reason, we should fight till the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baggio Leung, for those great remarks. Now we would like to introduce, last but not least, Mr. Zhou Fengsuo, who has been one of the key advocates in the United States for the human rights in China issue. He has also been one of the members who has participated in the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. And since then, he has been doing his best to raise awareness about the atrocities that are going on back in his homeland, but also at the same time to encourage activism here in the United States and abroad. So now, without further ado, Mr. Zhou Fengsuo.
Thank you, Sampho, for your introduction, and thank you for the organizers for setting up this great event. You know, as Rushan just mentioned, January of 2020, we were about to have a panel discussion like this in Colombia, and it was canceled for reasons unknown. But I'm so glad today we are starting off again. As we talk about these depressing, looming important messages, these are not just remote issues. They relate to us, everyone here today. I'll talk about that later. I will introduce myself a little bit. As Sampho mentioned, I was a student leader in Tiananmen. In 1989, I was number 5 on the most wanted list. After the Tiananmen massacre, I spent a year in prison. On Tiananmen Square, it's the first time the Chinese people showed their hope for democratic China. And it's that hope that I will never forget. And that's what has always inspired and motivated me every day to do what's important for China's democratization. So that has eventually led me to start Humanitarian China, my current organization. And we focus on providing humanitarian support to political prisoners in China. And we promote rule of law, freedom of expression, and civil society in China. We work with many grassroots individuals and organizations. I just want to start my presentation by introducing some of the people we focus on. Yeah. Every year, Humanitarian China will provide between 100 to 200 individual cases of support to political prisoners. This is just a very small fraction of the unknown number of political prisoners that's just increasing very dramatically every day, because just the way China controls, we never know. So even for these people, we know little. I think most people just have never heard of their stories. But for us, it's also a privilege to work with these people, to know what they are fighting for, to know their suffering, and to know their endurance, their courage to stand up against a totalitarian regime. And that is a hope for a democratic China. Let me see if... Let me share my screen with you. Oh, I sent out the link to my presentation. You can open that too. Let me see. Share screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So let me, just introduce. These are just a few that we come out. I mean, there are just so many that we can't. I hope we'll have a chance just to call their name one by one. But we can do whatever we can. I mean, in such a short time, and many of them are in critical situation, like Zhang Zhan. She was a Christian lawyer and citizen journalist. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison simply for trying to tell the facts of Wuhan virus, what we call the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic that started in Wuhan. She was, when she heard about the pandemic, her first reaction was, I want to be there. I want to be with these people who are suffering, and I want to know the truth. So this by itself was against the government. And that's what she did. She went there, she talked to people, she broadcast what she saw. And for this, she was put in prison for 4 years. And she is in hunger strike. She's very weak now. And she requires a wheelchair to move around. She has lost a lot of body weight, but still she's fighting on. This here, I think she says it well. If all that is left in life is fear, then all I can do is to fight the fear again and again until I get over it. I think this is a great call from a courageous fighter. That's what motivated her. That's what is carrying her on today. But we must let the world know. And so she is not just fighting alone. And she is in very critical condition. If you can, for example, if you can just write to the prison, call the people, and that's just some of the ways we can help her. This is a different case. Wang Meiyu, who died 2 years ago. It's about that's yesterday. So his only offense was openly to calling for the stepped up for a democratic vote election in China. And for that, he was imprisoned and died within 2 months. He was a very strong man, but he died mysteriously just within 2 months. Of course, there's a lot of political brutality even in his previous detention. So, but because he's strong, and in 2 years ago, most people, I think in China, were just very fearful. And here you have someone who is openly calling for the very head of Communist Party to step down for instead for Chinese people to have a direct election. And that's how he died. Let's remember his name, Wang Meiyu, so he wouldn't die in vain. And this is Li Lin. I knew his name on Twitter. I followed his story, but he disappeared mysteriously. And then later people talk about he traveled with his family in Xinjiang, East Turkestan. It's later we know that it's only because of his tweets he was arrested and he was tortured. Of course, for these tweets, he was only describing what he saw, what the Uyghurs were going through, for 5 tweets. So now he's serving 5 years in prison. This is Li Lin. Huang Xueqin, this just happened a few days ago. She was a journalist. I had the good fortune of meeting in Taiwan in 2019 when I was denied entry to Hong Kong to trying to participate in the anti-extradition demonstration in Hong Kong. So we were both in Taiwan then. And when she went back to China, she was detained. She wasn't allowed to leave, and basically under house arrest since then for 2 years. She was also a very well-known member of the Me Too movement. She is very outspoken. I think she represents the young people of China. She has been missing for about a week now, a few days, while she was supposed to board airplane to UK to study.
Mr. Zhou, sorry, just for time's sake, after we will be continuing on with questions after 1 minute. So if you can wrap it up, sir.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, this and Zhou Xingtong and Chang Weiping and Wang Yi. I can, if you want to know more, we have their stories and we have our newsletter telling them. But before I finish, I want to mention something that's specific to Colombia. This is Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel Peace Laureate, the only one from mainland China. And he was supposed to be a visiting scholar in 1989 before he went back to Tiananmen Square to participate in the student-led protest. And of course, that's his journey where he started his journey. Later, he became a leader of China's dissident community, and he died in prison. So my organization, Humanitarian in China, we erected this sculpture, and we want to gift to Colombia as an honor, but Colombia wouldn't accept it. They gave some funny reasons, but I believe this is honor for Colombia because of this association. He was Liu Xiaobo was the most important symbol of China's democratization, and I hope today's audience could help us maybe have this sculpture in Colombia.
Thank you so much, Mr. Zhou, and thank you again to all of the panelists for your introduction to the various issues that were presented here today. I think right now we would like to jump directly to our question. So our first question, and let's get into our discussion here, is that before we continue on, we would like to ask all of the panelists to please keep your answers as brief and concise as possible and to the point. That's our only request, and we'll be going ahead with our questions. So the first question is that what do you predict in the next 10 years for the development of the Chinese human rights? Will things get better or worse? And under what factors? And what have been the most effective means of human rights work and outreach in the Chinese system? I guess, and can you tell us a little more about any human rights success stories? How are they able to secure concessions from the government? And now I would like to invite anyone within the panel to please to jump in. And if you have anything that you feel would answer the question best, please do. I think maybe we can start with Mr. Zhou Fengsuo with this question.
Okay, yeah, good, thank you. I'm glad to answer. I think near term, there's little hope to be optimistic. I think China is already on the road of becoming Nazi Germany, like about 100 years ago. And it is an existential threat to the whole world. So there will be major confrontations on this. And because we work with people in China very closely, it's very difficult for China's civil society to develop now. It's almost impossible. As you can see from these examples, most of these civic leaders are arrested just for very remote reasons. It's very important to know that these people are still fighting up. But on the other hand, it's very difficult for these people, for example, to gather together. And with the digital totalitarianism, the monitoring, the surveillance, making it really hard for the traditional civil society to develop. That's the future, I think, for China. It's definitely for people, for the dissident community, it's very, very difficult. And the success story, yes, there are some. I think, I mean, it's not about us. It's about the people who fight on. For example, the Chinese human rights lawyers, the 709, the July 9 lawyers group. So I think that, in a way, it's a success story, mainly because the families of these lawyers, led by Wang Qiaoling, Li Wenzhu, the wives of the lawyers, they are so brilliant, courageous. They use whatever they can every week. They even try like performance art kind of protests to get people's attention, even though there's nothing happening once your loved ones are in prison. I think eventually, it is still a tragic crackdown. But on the other hand, I think these families, the way they fight on, eventually win the freedom for their loved ones. That is still a success story. We can see in some degree.
Thank you so much for that very, very concise answer. I'd like to call on Mr. Hunter Rhodes to ask a question interactively. Again, please keep your question up to the point and concise as possible.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Outstanding. This question comes to us from my classmate, Brandon Lambert. We were wondering about foreign countries conducting business in China, both with the government and privately, whether these companies are complicit in human rights violations and if there are any changes in business practice that would positively impact the situation in China.
Thank you so much for that question. I think, Mr. Enkhbat, I think with the 95% of the world's rare minerals coming from Southern Mongolia, I think maybe you could touch upon this question.
Sure. Yes. Well, this is many companies, especially foreign companies in China, when they enter China, they must obey so-called China's laws. So that means in order to run the business there, they have to accept Chinese terms. That means they are directly or indirectly working with the Chinese government. Of course, the government is, how oppressive this government is. And so, if you look at those big corporations, like, in the past, so many corporations like were compromising their working with the Chinese government to build some censorship, for example, internet censorship and so on. So yes, it is, in my view, yes, it's working in China, having business in China is very, they have to be very cautious. Otherwise, they will, violate the human rights of those people, especially like people of those occupied nations like, Southern Mongolia, Tibet, and East Turkestan, where there's, in East Turkestan, there's a physical genocide is happening, and then in Southern Mongolia and Tibet, there's cultural genocides taking place.
Great. And, just on that point alone, before we get to Mr. Zhou, Mr. Sampho, do you have anything that you would like to add, given the fact that a lot of Western companies are looking to locate into Tibet in the past few years, actually?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of the Chinese companies were, as Enkhbat said, have to rule. So the Tibetans have been, deprived of, where it only, run by. But I think what we have to do in the future is we have to pressure our representatives, our government, not to let the, Chinese to operate, in free hands. We have to call them up and, be aware of the, things that are either happening in East Turkestan, Mongolia, or Tibet. Because if our government is not willing to, raise the issues, like us, we have been raising the human rights in the last 30 years, but there's not much, changes. But in the last, 8-9 months, because our government is, working up, and now we can able to, provide a, platform to all the people, not just only the ethnics, but the Chinese themselves. And our government must act and do their best, and without any hesitation. You have to confront the Chinese. Otherwise, if the government decided it, our voices, of course, we try to do everything, whether the government does or not, but our government is very small voice. So the government and institutions and individuals, activists must, be aware of and the report and make it awareness. Otherwise, the Chinese will, doesn't give any, values, or they will do everything what they, and ultimately they just try to destroy all the culture in the region, environmentally, religious and human, and so on and so forth.
Right, absolutely, and it seems to be leading to complete devastation. Mr. Zhou, I think you wanted to touch upon this point as well when it comes to.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question. As I mentioned before, the world is facing China as biggest threat since Nazi Germany. But Nazi Germany was more geographically restricted, whereas China now has global reach, both through trade and technology. And to me, I have been advocating this long time personally. I think that the best way is to confront, decouple, delink, with the way China is going, every trade with such a regime. There's no individual company in China, make no mistake. Every company in China is state-owned in the end. And CCP dictates what they do. So we just have to cut them off from global trade and technology. Otherwise, it will become a cancer and too big for us to deal with. I think for now, even now, I just worry it's probably too late, even because it's so big now. And it's able to dictate the rules to every company.
Right, and given that point, I think that leads me to our next panelist, Baggio Leung. Given all of this factor, and Hong Kong really being the financial capital of Asia, very arguably, what do you think? What can you share with us in regards to this question from a perspective from of a Hong Konger?
Oh, I would want to touch on the way out. Actually, we all know that how China leverage on his economic power to try to mess things up and mess the orders up. But for example, in United States, I am thinking to push for a legislation like ethical investment bill. So basically, we cut the entire funding from the US financial market through Hong Kong as a financial center to support now the China coercive and expansionist behavior. So it is somehow a way out that the world can work together and stop China expansionist behavior.
Now, I think you've touched upon a point, and the language. I think that really applies to the points of all of the panelists participating here today. You said Chinese expansionist efforts. Given what we heard today with all of the other panelists, and this question really goes out to everyone here today, is that, and also considering the fact that Mr. Zhou Fengsuo has said it may be too late, what do you think may be the solution to combat such an effort by the CCP? And if I could also, if I may, if indeed it is a bit too late, or it's about to be too late, what do you think not just the global governments, but what do you think specifically U.S. corporations can do? Or another point is that are they complicit in all of this operation? Mr. Zhou Fengsuo, do you think you can maybe step in?
Yeah, definitely. I think complicity is their default position. There are only a few notable exceptions, but even Google, which was much admired by the dissidents community before they pull out of China, in recent years was trying to produce a Chinese version that follows the Beijing's censorship and surveillance. And same thing happened to Twitter, for example, because of the way China is dominating the rules. Yeah, that's where I think we're facing this challenge we must confront. To me, I think there are just a lot of good initiatives that happened last year, and I hope will carry on this year. For example, stop using Huawei and the 5G, all that. I think these are good steps, but I'm not sure how current administration would carry that through or follow through. And for example, personally, we experienced this Zoom issue last year. My account was closed simply for having Tiananmen commemoration on Zoom. And it was attended by hundreds of people, some of them from within China. After FBI investigation, they realized Zoom, such a US company, a global leader in this important technology, was taking orders from Jin Xinjiang, who was in fact a CCP state security agent. So here, US company is paying these CCP security agent and listening to them. And I believe, because if you look at the FBI indictment, it's clear what this guy said. He said, every company that does business in China follows such protocol. You basically have someone there in your company that tells you what to do, what Beijing wants to hear, what Beijing wants you to do, and that's what it is. Fortunately for us, we have this capable FBI agent who investigated. This is the only case. This is the only case in the United States that has been fully uncovered, even though the investigation is going on. And it just shows such astonishing facts. How US companies are working. I think same if we ask Apple, for example, how you work with Beijing, we'll see some similar picture. Yeah.
Right, and I think that leads me to my next question. Given all of this factors, I think with the recent events in China and with the U.S.-China relations at bay, do you think maybe perhaps there are more countries and foreign governments are pulling out of doing business with China now that human rights issues have become made more public? And I think this question should be just directed towards Mr. Baggio and also to Mr. Tenzin and Mr. Enkhbat, given the fact that their homeland were one of the, perhaps some of the most affected areas by the regime in China right now. So I think firstly, if Baggio can maybe share this question, do you think this is going to happen? And if indeed it is happening, do you think it will be sustained for at least for the near future?
It is obviously happening. You can see Hong Kong, and then it's just a perfect example that how in Hong Kong, I haven't have like McDonald's and Starbucks for years because it is owned by a pro-Beijing company in Hong Kong. It's just franchise. by a pro-Beijing company. So I have my first McDonald's and Starbucks in the United States for the past few years. And for my observation, unfortunately, I think holding everything constant, the trend is going to the worst side, the bad side. The current trend is like when China economic growth is slowing down, and when she is facing more pressure politically, there are more repression. But like from the other way saying, like the night is darkest before dawn. So more repression, it is like shows that we are getting close. So I think in the past few months, field cases shows that we are still on the right track. China, they try to shut down all like the Bitcoin's transaction within China border. Like their property market seems is going worse. I expect that in terms of human rights, more repression is coming because of they are like the economic growth is slowing down, but it also means that we are getting close.
And looking at all those things that are happening with the Bitcoin issue and you know, everything else, etc. As a Tibetan and also as a Southern Mongolian, how do you view this as impacting your areas? And do you think it will impact now that companies are seems to be having second thoughts about economically engaging with China? I think Mr. Enkhbat can maybe step in first.
Sure. Well, you know, these foreign corporations, like Western companies, are benefiting at least two things from China. One is cheap labor. The other one is, like raw materials or mineral, wealth plundered from those occupied nations. Like you mentioned that Southern Mongolia, for example, it's producing at some point. Some Southern Mongolia produced world's 97% of world rare earth, well, which is very critical ingredients for all high, technology, high tech products, like including, iPhone, space shuttle, everything, computers. So China is like, China is a authoritarian regime. It's a licensed abuser, and it's a licensed robber. So everybody, well, the Western countries, I mean, for example, and here in the United States or in Europe, so it's companies. These countries are supposedly democratic country. You cannot rob people directly. So, but they are through, doing business with China. They are actually robbing Southern Mongolia, Tibet, and East Turkestan, and then they are just exploiting the cheap labor through the Chinese, Chinese government, Chinese regime. So yes, I mean, again, as I mentioned earlier, Southern Mongolia is China's powerhouse. China announced that Southern Mongolia is the largest energy base, and Southern Mongolia produced China's it became China's top coal producer, and rare earth, and iron and everything. So see, these are not, local people are not benefited from it, and they just kicked off their land, and gave way to these corporations. So I think yes, this is how the Western companies are benefiting from China, through working with through the Chinese government and Chinese regime.
Right. Now, Mr. Tenzin Sampho, do you think maybe companies will be pulling out from China potentially, given the given all of the situation that's going on? If you can answer that as concise as possible.
Given the harsh on the high altitude of the Tibetan Plateau, I'm not sure there are many foreign corporations, but there are certainly many Chinese companies have been exploring many different parts of the Tibetan area, Amdo, Kham, and the Central West. And of course, these are violation of the Tibetans' nomadic areas, or some of the the mountains like holy mountains. They do not care, and there are a lot of the Tibetans have been protesting. This is our grassy land, or this is a holy mountain, so on and so forth. But Chinese government, they don't care, and a lot of them, I have witnessed or read that the Chinese force was physically detained, imprisoned, or they have punished, or monetary punishment. And that, of course, Chinese also building huge military bases, given the tension between the India and China that in the recent few months. So there are a lot of armies who are going on, army military camps on, and there's also a lot of nuclear waste has been dumping. So it's very difficult for the average people who can go into the in Tibetans and investigate and report, because the journalists, the human rights groups, the Tibetans, even the Tibetans, other citizens, they were not allowed to go, and then the human rights groups, diplomats, they were all barred by that. It's very, very difficult to go into Tibet and freely. There are brave Tibetans who have been giving informations what happened, the tortures of whatever. Other than that, it's very difficult because it's very remotely accessed, and the Chinese are controlling everything. So, but anyway, knowing that the Chinese companies are do anything what they want, it is, of course, it's detrimental to the Tibetan landscape and culture. Tibet is now Tibetans become a minority. So it's not, doesn't mean that in the future there are some companies will, but we have to beware, and we must raise by the environmentalists or the humanists, whatever we might be.
Right. Now that leads me to my next question, and this question has been asked by a number of our participants and those who know that this event was going on. Now, many experts state that President Xi Jinping's current policies are leading towards a state more similar to that of Chairman Mao's, instead of political opening and change. Now, with this question, I would like to ask what your thoughts are, given all of the things that were happening so far with the Bitcoin, as I stated before, with the Bitcoin situation, degradation of human rights, status in the country, and other factors that all of you have mentioned today. I think maybe Mr. Zhou Fengsuo, you can jump into this. Like, what is your view on this, given the fact that you have been focusing heavily on the changes of Chinese leadership and their behavior throughout the years?
Right. 9 years ago, when Xi Jinping was still waiting to become next leader, there were lots of talks about him being potentially a reformer, a new reformer of some kind, because of rumored position of his father being against Tiananmen massacre. I think at that time, I made a statement, I think it's still true today. I said, Xi Jinping, and at that time, Bo Xilai, who was removed because of Xi Jinping, because they were competitors for the top position. They were both princelings. I said, these princelings, they are never the son of their father. They are the son of Mao. Spiritually, they worship Mao and they fashion themselves in Mao. I think at many directions in China, we are definitely going there. There's a revival of Mao-style performances, and people are encouraged to report on each other. For example, family, kids reporting on their parents, students reporting on their teacher. All that, I think these favorite tools of a parent. I think that's in Xi's toolbox. So he is in many ways fashion himself. But I think there's another side that's Mao had global ambition, but he never really had a chance to expand beyond truly beyond that category. But now Xi Jinping see himself as much more capable. So on that, I think territorial expansion, and of course the expansion on trade, on technology, and that's what Xi Jinping is going after. Being a communist, being like an emperor of some kind, he would want global dominance. That's for sure. And maybe we'll see some kind of, for example, invading Taiwan as a next step, because he needs a crowning achievement and for an emperor, and that's, I think, a territorial claim. That's just the first.
Right. And now that you mentioned Taiwan, I think the next question would apply more to Mr. Baggio Leung, is that given the President Xi's practices within China and his ambition to implement the CCP policies in areas where he has deemed to be CCP, should be CCP controlled areas, what is the future of Hong Kong under the national security law? And I think specifically, how are the independence movements and student activists responding to the combination of repression and COVID-19? And how do you think even maybe overseas Hong Kong activists will still be able to inspire change?
As I have mentioned in my presentation, I'm not that optimistic to Hong Kong futures. Like a repression and majorly COVID gave us a very big hit. And the regime basically just took the chance to crack down everything. Although there are still activists who sacrifice themselves and try to do a breakthrough on the situation, but when more and more groups and great people were arrested, afraid that the reality is more tough than what we imagine. And I think the role of overseas advocacy work is basically two things. The first thing is to buy time for Hong Kong people. And that's why we are lobbying for the lifeboat program here and to let those who are in danger, let them to come out. The second thing is to gather resources for regrouping and for fight back. In terms of like financial resources, legislation from some countries, or some like systematic sanctioning that would greatly help as well.
Right, and really just mentioning Hong Kong, I think just very briefly, I'd like to ask Mr. Enkhbat and Mr. Tenzin, with all of this in mind, with all of the political status, the situation, I would say, within China in mind, what do you think is the solution to resolving the issue of Tibet? Both Tibet and Southern Mongolia, as you know, have faced a cultural and religious repression on a daily basis, according to reports by numerous journalists and experts. And I think it would be worth it if both of you can maybe touch upon the cultural preservation of Michiru people. So I think first, if we can have Mr. Tenzin Sampho touch upon that, would be great.
The Tibetan situation is very similar to the Inner Mongol and the eastern Turkestan, and now Hong Kong. So Taiwan cannot be part of China. China says it's renegades, but historically it's just been independent, and it's a respected independent, since 1949, and now it's one of the best democratic systems that we witness in daily basis. And China is going to claim and for the Taiwanese nothing but to lose everything that they have. So all the people around the world, including the in China Sea area, that they have to very vocal, and they have to be upfront, and you cannot be shy. China is of course expanding their territory throughout the Asia, and as far as the cultural reservations and their freedoms and the language, so on and so on, the Taiwanese can see the Hongkongese what happens to the Tibetans. I mean, in the last 60-something years, they are trying to wipe out the Tibetan identity, every aspect of life. So they better learn fast, and I'm sure they are witnessing what kind of groups they try to get on Taiwan. So we must it's for once you under the Chinese regime, there's much you can do. I mean, except because they are totalitarian, they do not respect the international law. And even though we try to make race, awareness, but the Tibetans and the Uyghurs and in the Mongolia, they are suffering on a daily basis. They are for example, the Tibetans, the most peaceful non-existence, anywhere in the world. Yet we have been crushed, and we have been wiped out our culture, language, as I said many times in the past. So I think there's no way that Taiwanese people should be. I mean, every individual and every citizen, you have to sacrifice something for your future. There's nothing you can gain being a part of China, and China is just lying and telling try to conquer one after another.
Sure. And I think next point I should be going to Mr. Enkhbat Toochog. And as both of you, we can see on the screen, is that both of you are wearing your traditional outfits. I guess we can automatically sort of take that as your efforts to promote preservation of your culture and identity. So Mr. Enkhbat Toochog, if we can touch upon this point about the resolving the issue of Southern Mongolia and then cultural preservation.
Sure. So you also mentioned that if there is any solution to resolving the issues of Tibet, East Turkestan, and Southern Mongolia, I think the only solution is independence, national and political independence, complete independence, which is the only and which is the best and the highest form of guarantee of human rights, national freedom, national culture, and national identity of any nation and people who are under foreign domination or foreign colonization. There's no other way. The past 70 years tell us that any form of negotiated freedom or discounted freedom, such as the so-called autonomy, is futile in guaranteeing the rights of these occupied nations and peoples like Southern Mongolia, Tibet, and East Turkestan. Chinese government at the beginning, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, so Chinese government or the CCP promised that the promise to the Southern Mongolians that they will implement the so-called autonomy, nationality autonomy, which end up as a broken promise. It's a lie. There's no such thing called autonomy at all. So this is a bitter lesson. We can learn, and especially Hong Kong, and maybe Hong Kong is too late. It's already part of China. especially for Taiwan and other countries, even neighboring countries, which are threatened, their sovereignty and independence even threatened by the Chinese regime. So like, we have to know that now the Chinese problem is not just a problem of occupation and colonization of Tibet, East Turkestan, and Southern Mongolia. Now Chinese problem is a global problem. It's a global problem. So we really have to look at, you know, our history, our bloodshed. It's a dire warning to all other countries, including the Western countries like United States.
Right. So that leads me to our next and perhaps our final question for tonight is that I think this question may pertain more to Mr. Zhou Fengsuo and even to a certain extent to Baggio. How have the Han Chinese majority have been inspired to support human rights in China? And perhaps the other question that would follow is that how can the Han Chinese and different groups within China whose communities already interact with each other in vital ways work together for cooperation and perhaps for increased sovereignty? If you can maybe touch upon that in less than maybe in the next 5 minutes, that'll be helpful. Thank you.
Can you see that question again?
Sure. How have the Han Chinese majority been inspired to support the human rights in China? And how can the Han Chinese and different groups within China whose communities already interact with each other in vital ways work together for cooperation, perhaps, and increase sovereignty? So basically, I think the question is, you know, when you see these different types of human rights situations occurring in China, you know, how have the Han Chinese majority participated, do you think? And do you think there will be at least an opportunity for the Han Chinese majority, as well as with all the other groups, to perhaps work together to increase the human rights efforts?
Of course, you know, every Han Chinese has a responsibility to fight for China's democratization, and you know, in that we can all work together. For now, of course, the situation is very dark. Most of the freedom fighters are very small minority. I mean, even here, where I am in the United States, I'm just a very small minority of the Chinese community here, simply because most of the Chinese here are controlled by China through like WeChat and through trade, through all these information flow. So the situation is definitely very serious. For us, I think what we are fighting on now, you know, in a way, it's also a preservation of the tradition of freedom for China outside in exile. That's what we do. That's why, you know, we remember Tiananmen, trying to collect and build a museum for Tiananmen and the Chinese statesmen. And that's why, you know, we want people to know, just like what I listed, the 7 political prisoners who are fighting courageously within China, for China's freedom. But of course, we, I think the most difficult challenge now is the firewall, that prevent us from reaching the majority of Han Chinese. And going back to the earlier question about the US companies enabling this totalitarian regime, when China joined WTO, they set up the Great Firewall. So basically, you know, that's 2 sides of the same thing. So with the firewall in place, every trade with China basically empowers this regime. And so for me, I think the US should insist on removing this firewall, as a top priority in any trade talk. For example, Google has to be open in China for any Chinese company to have presence in US market. That's just only fair. But I don't think United States is doing the right thing. I've been calling for this for a long time. Otherwise, we have to delink Chinese internet companies from the internet, for example, as a way to force China to open up. There are good examples. For example, this year, when Clubhouse was still open in China, I was able to talk to thousands of mainland Chinese, mostly Han Chinese, and for them it was like first time to hear about Tiananmen, but still they were so eager, even after so many years of being brainwashed, and they are just very motivated to know more, to get to know the truth. So that's the other aspect of the majority of Han Chinese we want to reach, but we are not getting the tools, the capability to do that. Of course, hours after I spoke, Clubhouse was banned in China, and we could no longer do that.
Certainly sounds very devastating. And I think Baggio would, I think just within 1 minute, maybe you could just share, maybe on this point is that what do you think that could be the future of cooperation with all of these groups? Are you optimistic about the Han majority and all the other groups working together?
Yeah, so firstly, I think it is not about race, we all agree that, but about like the culture or identity and the values that we treasure. Because in terms of race, like skin color or hair texture, probably we like Hong Kongers, we do Hong Kongers and minions, we will look like Han Chinese because we all have yellow skin color and black hair, but it's just not a fact. But like for as I can only say that like Hong Kongers, we totally support like Tibetan, like Uyghurs, like Mongolians, and all other freedom fighters among the world to fight for freedom. And as like a former elected person, like I can tell that like most Hong Kongers do have the same belief as me. So like here in the United States, I always do my best to cooperate with each other. And like the boycott genocide game topic, I think it is a good chance for us to work together to call for full boycott.
Sure. Thank you so much. And very beautifully put, that human rights goes beyond race and religious boundaries that often, unfortunately, become obstacles in many areas of the world. So now we are at the end of our great discussion. And firstly and foremost, we'd like to thank all of the panelists for participating in this great and even say historical panel discussion. And given what has happened last year, the fact that we are given another platform like this online, but being able to just reach out to a lot of people out there is definitely something to remember for our lifetimes. I would like to also give a special thanks on behalf of all of the panelists and everyone watching to our brave students at Zeta Beta Tau, who has really stepped up and given us this platform to discuss and to really given us a chance to reach out to students and scholars so that these issues may not be forgotten despite all the things that are happening around the world. A few announcements. We will be doing these events on a monthly basis. Next month, we will be touching upon a global economic topic with some very, very special guests who will be able to touch upon some of the global economic operations by the United States, China, and elsewhere. And we're very, very excited to present them to all of our audiences in the future. And again, a very, very heartfelt thanks to all of you for your participation, and really a heartfelt thanks to all of the audience members who have participated. Thank you so much, and it's an honor for all of us to have had this platform provided to us by the students at the Columbia University. Thank you so much, and please have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Thank you, Sampho.